So Harry and Mr. Weasley head to the Ministry for the hearing, and of course we see Mr. Weasley's excitement with Muggle technology. I just love this scene in the movie. They enter the Ministry itself through the, visitor's entrance, and again, this is another incredible set. It feels very grand, but also a little cold and off-putting. I also love this massive poster of Fudge, a great visual way of showing how obsessed with his own power he's become. We do see a glimpse of the Fountain of Magical Brethren in the movie, but it's not really focused on like it is in the book. Basically, it shows a witch and wizard standing over a centaur, a goblin, and a house elf who are all looking up at them in admiration. An effective way of showing how the wizards of the Ministry see the wizarding race, as the pinnacle of life which other life forms all look up to. Upon looking at the statue more closely, it occurs to Harry, based on his own experiences with them, that no centaur or goblin would ever look admiringly at a witch or wizard like that, and that only the house elf's creeping servility rings true. The events in the Ministry leading up to the hearing are effectively shortened in the movie. In the book, we get the names of each department as Harry and Mr. Weasley descend the lift. The two of them decide to wait in Mr. Weasley's office until the hearing. On the way, they encounter Kingsley, who Mr. Weasley converses with very coldly and formally, obviously keeping up appearances but pretending not to be on friendly terms. Kingsley slips Mr. Weasley an edition of the Quibbler magazine to give to Sirius. At Mr. Weasley's office, after Mr. Weasley talks about some reports on regurgitating toilets that have been jinxed to toss everything back up rather than flush it down, his office mate, Perkins, shows up and lets him know that the time of the hearing has been changed to 5 minutes ago. Obviously, they changed it on purpose to make Harry late so they'd have one more thing to use against him. The movie condenses all of this by simply having Kingsley come into the lift and whisper the new time of the hearing to Mr. Weasley there. I think this is an effective way of condensing all of this while still getting the same stuff across, the time change as well as Kingsley's undercover work within the Ministry. When they reach the Department of Mysteries level, in the movie they find Cornelius Fudge talking with Lucius Malfoy. In the book, this happens after the hearing. They reach Courtroom 10 and Mr. Weasley sends Harry in. Again, I like the way he quotes a Muggle phrase in the movie.
As the Muggles say, truth will out. Yes?
So then we have the hearing. Obviously, Fudge is completely biased, trying to tilt things against Harry, even going against things he's said and done in the past, like,
the Ministry doesn't send people to Azkaban for blowing up their aunt.
Thankfully, Amelia Bones, the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, is also present, and she's looking at everything very objectively. In the book, Percy Weasley is also there, taking the minutes of the hearing, but he doesn't acknowledge Harry. And of course, we meet, I'm just gonna say it, one of the greatest villains ever created. Out of all fictional characters, I don't know if I can name one that makes my blood boil like Dolores Jane Umbridge. Okay, well, Umbridge is a close second. But as much as I hate this bitch, I can't deny that she is an incredible character. This is a woman who will stop at nothing to gain more and more power over everybody, and not in a fantastical way like Voldemort, but in a terrifyingly realistic way. She's not an exceptionally powerful witch, but through sheer ruthlessness and manipulation, she manages to keep gaining and maintaining power and influence in the government, and uses this power to dominate whoever she can. While she's not a Death Eater, she carries every prejudice that exists in the wizarding world, and uses her power to make life harder for Muggleborns and non- or even part-humans. She's basically a Karen with actual authority. She has no boundaries, no morals, and no conscience. She takes sadistic pleasure in hurting and dominating people. Just look at her while she's torturing all these students. She is in heaven right now. And all of this wrapped up in a tiny little pink package. Voldemort, while he does bear some similarities to certain historical figures, is very much a fantasy villain. But we've all met someone like Umbridge. Oh, and trust me, the movie barely scratches the surface of the horrible things she does and says in the book. Speaking of the movie though, Imelda Staunton, incredible in this role. She really made me want to throw her out a window just as much as, if not more than, her book counterpart, despite not doing quite as many horrible things. Sure, she doesn't really look like Umbridge is described in the book, but who cares? She nailed the performance. Besides, I don't know if there's anyone who really does look like Umbridge. She has one of the most vivid descriptions in the book, to the point that I was able to picture her right away. He thought she looked just like a large pale toad. She was rather squat, with a broad flabby face, as little neck as Uncle Vernon, and a very wide slack mouth. Her eyes were large, round, and slightly bulging. Even the little black velvet bow perched on top of her short curly hair put him in mind of a large fly she was about to catch on a long sticky tongue. But I'll definitely have more chances to talk about Umbridge in this video, so let's go back to the scene. Dumbledore's entrance in both versions is great.
Minister for
Witness for the defense. Albus Percival, Wulfric, Brian, Dumbledore.
Especially since it's clear Fudge and the others didn't expect nor want him to show up.
You got our message that the time and place of the hearing had been changed, did you?
I must have missed it, but by a happy mistake, I arrived at the Ministry 3 hours early.
How much do you want to bet they didn't even send Dumbledore anything? So Fudge reads out the charges to Harry, constantly talking over him and not giving him a chance to speak. There is a moment here in the book where Amelia Bones expresses her amazement that a boy so young was able to conjure a fully formed Patronus. Harry eventually manages to blurt out that there were Dementors, much to everyone's disbelief.
Dementors? A little winching.
Yeah, that's quite clever. Muggles can't see Dementors, can they, boy? Highly convenient.
As Dumbledore points out, this would make Harry's use of underage magic self-defense, if true, so he brings in Mrs. Fig as a witness. Something in the book Fudge tries to prevent, but Amelia Bones allows it. Unfortunately, as a squib, Mrs. Fig, just like Muggles, can't see Dementors. However, while Fudge is unimpressed by her testimony, Amelia Bones is somewhat swayed by how accurately she described the feeling Dementors bring. Fudge then questions the odds of Dementors wandering through a Muggle suburb and happening to come across a wizard, leading Dumbledore to suggest someone had ordered them there. And this is where the bitch in pink herself speaks up for the first time.
It's so silly of me, but it sounded for a moment as though you were suggesting that the Ministry had ordered the attack on this boy.
I won't go into detail on this part yet, but let's just say there's something the book reveals at the end that the movie never does. In the book, Fudge goes over all of Harry's past misdemeanors, like using a hovering charm and blowing up his aunt. When he brings up the things Harry gets up to in school, Dumbledore points out that the Ministry has no say in how Hogwarts is run or how its students are disciplined. This was likely what inspired Fudge to appoint Umbridge to the school. In both versions, Dumbledore points out that in the process of upholding the law, Fudge has been breaking quite a few laws himself.
Laws can be changed if necessary, Dumbledore.
Clearly, it's become practice to hold a full criminal trial to deal with a simple matter of underage magic.
Now, in the movie, this is the last thing Dumbledore says, but in the book, we see him remind the court that Harry's past offenses aren't relevant to this hearing, only the one he's being tried for. So the court take their vote, and Harry is
Cleared of all charges?
I love this visual touch the movie added, showing the contrast between Cornelius Fudge and Amelia Bones. When asked who is in favor of conviction, Fudge is the first to raise his hand, and he looks to the people behind him, as if to say, I'm your minister, you'd better vote as I do. Whereas when asked who is in favor of clearing Harry, Amelia Bones waits until others have had a chance, and only then raises her own hand. You know, it's no wonder the Death Eaters decided to kill her between books. The Ministry might have actually been able to get stuff done with her around. And of course, Dumbledore never once talks to or even looks at Harry this whole time. Dumbledore avoiding Harry is of course a plot thread that will carry throughout this entire book and movie, and is one of the main sources of Harry's anger. Dumbledore does have his reasons for this, of course, but I'll talk about those when he does. Honestly, this book I feel is the one where I think Dumbledore makes the most mistakes, and even he admits so at the end. Now, the movie cuts right to the train station after this, but in the book we see Harry leave the courtroom and meet up with Mr. Weasley, who was shocked to see that Harry was tried by the full court. Then, as I mentioned before, this is where they come across Fudge and Lucius Malfoy. In the book, they actually interact, as Malfoy, of course, makes several snide remarks towards both of them before he and Fudge go upstairs. Mr. Weasley explains to Harry that Lucius Malfoy has been increasing his influence for years by donating to various causes. Harry then brings up a pretty decent point. Maybe Fudge is under the Imperius curse. But as Mr. Weasley says, it has occurred to the rest of them too, but Dumbledore thinks Fudge is acting of his own free will. We cut back to Grimmauld Place, where Harry tells everyone he's been cleared. Everyone, of course, is delighted. Everyone except Sirius, who, though initially happy, soon becomes very surly. Hermione suspects that the reason for this is that he had gotten his hopes up that Harry would be coming to live with him, and that there's probably a part of him that was secretly hoping Harry would be expelled for this reason. She says he's being selfish and suggests that, much like Mrs. Weasley implied earlier, he sometimes thinks Harry is James. I've mentioned that I much prefer the relationship between Harry and Sirius in the movie. However, I wouldn't have minded if the movie did show a bit of this more selfish side of Sirius. I'm not upset that they didn't, though. Ron and Hermione also receive letters telling them they've been made prefects. This is something that was never mentioned in the movies. Mrs. Weasley is delighted, of course, but everyone else is just kind of shocked it wasn't Harry, including Ron himself. Fred and George, of course, taunt Ron mercilessly about it, and Harry even starts to feel a bit of jealousy. We see him having a battle with himself and see a more entitled side to him. There's a part of him that, as much as he tries to convince himself otherwise, thinks he deserved this more than Ron. And he wonders if, by feeling this way, that makes him similar to Malfoy. Ultimately, his better nature wins out, and he realizes that he shouldn't take this away from Ron. But it's this sort of inner dialogue and debate that really helps flesh Harry out as a character in a way that the movies just aren't able to. He does still carry some insecurities about it, though, as he wonders why Dumbledore didn't choose him. As Dumbledore explains at the end, it's simply because he feels Harry has enough on his plate as it is without having to worry about the responsibilities of a prefect. Mrs. Weasley throws a party for Ron and Hermione, and we learn a bit more about some of the other characters, like how Tonks was never able to behave herself at school, and Lupin was made a prefect in his 5th year, most likely because Dumbledore hoped he would control his troublemaking friends. As he admits, though, he failed at this. Mrs. Weasley also buys Ron a new broom, a Clean Sweep 7. We also see that Fred and George have been buying ingredients for their joke products from Mundungus. Now, there is one part here that was used later in the movie under very different circumstances. Moody shows Harry a picture of the original Order of the Phoenix and identifies all of the members, several of whom are dead, including Harry's parents, as well as Frank and Alice Longbottom, who were tortured into insanity. This actually greatly upsets Harry, and he leaves the party and runs upstairs. In the movie, this moment happens in the train station, and it's Sirius who shows Harry the picture. It's also portrayed as a much more emotional and, I guess, positive moment than it is in the book, as it doesn't seem to upset Harry much. I really like this change. As someone with a closer personal attachment to Harry as well as his parents, seeing Sirius show Harry this photo and hearing him talk about the people in it and how much he misses them makes this scene very emotionally affecting. It also deepens the connection between the two of them, something that, as I've said, was lacking in the book. So this was a really good change. One other big moment we see here is after Harry runs upstairs due to being upset by the photograph, he comes across Mrs. Weasley dealing with a Boggart. Unfortunately, it seems to have gotten the better of her as she is broken down sobbing due to the Boggart constantly changing its shape into various members of her family dead. It even turns into a dead Harry at one point. Eventually, Lupin, Sirius, and Moody arrive to help, and Lupin finishes off the Boggart and comforts Mrs. Weasley. I found this to be a really powerful moment, showing the fear of a mother losing her family, especially given how involved they've all become in this new war. It must be really hard for people like her who stay back while their loved ones are off fighting. What's especially sad in hindsight is that when the Boggart turns into Fred and George's bodies, it turns into both of them at once. Not even in her darkest nightmares could Mrs. Weasley imagine only one of them dying. This is another moment I really wish the movie could have included, but at the same time understand why they couldn't given the limited screen time they had. There is a brief moment where Harry feels his scar burning. This, as he discusses with Ron later, is because Voldemort is furious. We never definitively find out what he was furious about here, but if I were to guess, it's that he just found out from Lucius that the diary had been destroyed. When this happens, Harry hears a snide remark from the empty picture frame near his bed. This, as we learn later, was Phineas Nigellus Black, Sirius's great-great-grandfather, who can wander freely between his portrait here and the one in the headmaster's office at Hogwarts. Now, one of the major plot points in this book and movie is the connection between Harry and Voldemort, and more specifically, that Harry, when sleeping, often sees Voldemort's thoughts. We start to see this when Harry goes to sleep here, as he has the first of many dreams about a long corridor with a locked door at the end. This, as we later learn, is the Department of Mysteries, and he's dreaming about it because Voldemort's thoughts are obsessed with it and obtaining the prophecy deep within. So Mrs. Weasley takes her children, Harry and Hermione, to King's Cross Station with Moody and Tonks coming for protection. According to Moody in the book, Sturgis Podmore was supposed to come as well, but he never showed, and apparently this is the second time he didn't. The reason for this, as we learn later, is because he had been placed under the Imperius Curse by the Death Eaters at this point, in hopes that he can steal the prophecy from the Department of Mysteries for them. And of course, Sirius comes along, disguised as a dog, going completely against Dumbledore's orders that he was to stay put in his house at all times. By the way, is it just me, or are Moody and Tonks not exactly being inconspicuous here? I mean, they're surrounded by muggles right now. In the book, Moody wears a hat he tilts down over his magical eye, and Tonks uses her shape-shifting powers to make her look like an old lady. I think it would have been cool to see the movie play around with her powers more with disguises like this. The movie adds a couple things here. I already mentioned the scene with Sirius showing Harry the photo, which was moved up from earlier in the book. But this vision Harry has of Voldemort also wasn't in the book, and I'm not entirely sure what to make of it. Also, one more thing. In the movie, there are no apparent consequences to Sirius coming along with them to the station. But in the book, Lucius Malfoy, who thanks to Pettigrew now knows about his dog form, sees him and informs Fudge. So despite all of Kingsley's efforts to misdirect the Ministry, they now know he's in London. The movie also skips the entire train ride, and the important things that happen there in the book are moved up to later. For example, this is where we first meet Luna Lovegood in the book, whereas the movie moved it ahead to the carriage, which I don't really mind. Luna is one of my favorite characters in the books. I just love how bizarre she is, while also being oddly calming and comforting to be around. It's also nice to see more representation for Ravenclaw. Until now, Cho has been the only prominent Ravenclaw in the series. The movies absolutely nailed this character. Ivana Lynch is Luna. I can't humanly imagine a more perfect casting choice. It's like they reached into the book and pulled the character right out of it. She looks exactly how I imagined her, and her voice and mannerisms are dead on.
Unfortunately, all my shoes have mysteriously disappeared. I suspect Nargles are behind it. He's lovely. They've been known to sing on Boxing Day, you know. Quibbler? I've never been to this part of the castle. At least not while awake. I sleepwalk, you see. That's why I wear shoes to bed. Come, Daddy. Harry doesn't want to talk to us right now. He's just too polite to say so.
In the book, it's Ginny who introduces Luna rather than Hermione, which makes sense, seeing as Luna is in Ginny's year. Also, she only introduces Harry and Neville, as Ron and Hermione were called to the Prefects' carriage. We learn a bit more about Luna in the book. Namely, that her father is the editor of the Quibbler, the magazine she's reading, which has a lot of very bizarre articles in it. There's one that suggests that Sirius Black is actually Stubby Boardman, the lead singer of a band called the Hobgoblins, and another that suggests Cornelius Fudge wants to take over Gringotts and has had several goblins killed through various methods, like poisoning, drowning, dropping off buildings, and even cooking them in pies. Interestingly, when Hermione criticizes the Quibbler for containing nothing but rubbish, we actually see Luna get somewhat cold and angry, something we almost never see. There's also an article on ancient runes in the magazine, which you're supposed to read upside down, so that at least explains why Luna was reading it upside down. I kind of love that the movie never explains this, though. It just adds even more to her weirdness. I also love how the movie never addresses this weird cactus thing Neville is holding. In the book, he tells them it's called Mimulus Mimbletonia, and it was a gift from his great uncle. He tries to show off what it does, and ends up getting the entire compartment soaked in some sort of green liquid. And to make things worse, Cho Chang briefly shows up, only to see Harry drenched in the green stuff. Interestingly, we learned from Harry's internal monologue that he's really embarrassed that she walked in on him, not only covered in that stuff, but with Neville and Luna, showing that he doesn't think terribly highly of the two of them, at least in terms of how they affect his social standing. This will certainly change after this book. Ron and Hermione eventually return to the compartment, and they tell Harry who the other prefects are. Much to their annoyance, the Slytherin prefects are Draco Malfoy and Pansy Parkinson. Because of course Malfoy would be a prefect. The Hufflepuff prefects are Ernie Macmillan and Hannah Abbott, and the Ravenclaws are Anthony Goldstein and Padma Patil. They do have an encounter with Malfoy later as he lords his new prefect authority over Harry and even implies that he knows Sirius was with him on the platform. While the whole prefect thing was dropped, the movie does show a brief interaction between them, and I love what Ron says here.
Just stay away from me!
It's only Malfoy. What do you expect?
After getting off the train, but before they reach the carriages, they see the first years being greeted not by Hagrid, but by Professor Grubbly Plank, the witch who temporarily took over Hagrid's classes last year, and they start to get worried about Hagrid. Of course, as we'll later learn, Hagrid is currently on a mission for Dumbledore. So then we come to the carriages, where Harry is shocked to see the Thestrals for the first time. Of course, the reason he's able to see them now is because he's seen someone die, Cedric. I mean, okay, he did see his mother die, but he was too young to understand death at that point. As I mentioned in previous videos, this is a plot hole in the movies, because in the first movie, he saw Quirrell die, whereas in the book, he fell unconscious. So really, he should have seen the Thestrals way before this. But that's not the fault of this movie, so I won't go on about it. I do love the design of the Thestrals in the movie. Yet again, they look almost exactly how I imagined. One minor change in the movie is that Neville can't seem to see the Thestrals, whereas in the book, as we learn later, he actually can, because he saw his grandfather die. In the book, we see the gang discussing Hagrid's absence and wondering what happened to him. Luna mentions that she and the other Ravenclaws don't think he's a very good teacher, which of course angers the others, except Hermione, who seems on the verge of agreeing. They notice Hagrid's not at the staff table, and Harry suggests, correctly, that he's simply not back yet from the mission he was on for Dumbledore. And of course, Harry spots Umbridge and immediately recognizes her from his hearing.
She was at my hearing. She works for Fudge.
This immediately makes Hermione suspicious. The movie understandably skips the sorting ceremony again, as well as the Sorting Hat song. This song is actually quite different from previous ones, as in addition to explaining its role in the different houses, it also mentions Hogwarts being in danger, warns that they all need to come together, and even says that dividing the students like this to begin with might be a mistake. Gee, you think? Nearly Headless Nick explains afterwards that the Hat sometimes talks about things like this in times of danger. So after Dumbledore reintroduces Professor Grubbly Plank and introduces Professor Umbridge, we see Umbridge interrupt Dumbledore's speech and start making a highly patronizing one of her own.
Thank you, Headmaster, for those kind words of welcome. And how lovely to see all your bright, happy faces smiling up at me.
And I already want to kick her off a cliff. Same with Harry, for that matter. After she says just a few words, he hates her pretty much immediately. Her voice was high-pitched, breathy, and little girlish, and again, Harry felt a powerful rush of dislike that he could not explain to himself. All he knew was that he loathed everything about her, from her stupid voice to her fluffy pink cardigan. During the speech, Umbridge makes several not-so-subtle hints that she's going to change the way things work here, all of which Hermione picks up on.
It means the Ministry is interfering at Hogwarts.
In addition to this, however, the simple act of making this speech at all is a deliberate power move on Umbridge's part. By interrupting the headmaster, she's trying to make it clear right off the bat who is, or at least will be, in charge. So after the feast, Harry heads to Gryffindor Tower, having to put up with stares from so many other students. When he reaches the dormitory, he meets up with Dean and Seamus, and we learn that Seamus doesn't believe Harry's claims that Voldemort has returned, mainly because of what his mother has said after reading the Daily Prophet. And I might as well say it right now, I'm sure Devin Murray is a really nice guy, but I think he's pretty easily the worst actor in these movies.
My mum didn't want me to come back this year. Let me see, because of you. Well, nobody was there the night Cedric died. Oh, well,
It's kind of interesting to see Harry snap at Seamus here, as all of his frustration over his unwanted fame and now infamy comes out. While Harry's anger in the movie is downplayed compared to the book, it's still more than we often get from him in the movies, and is some of Daniel Radcliffe's better work.
Oh, well, I guess you should read The Prophet then, like your stupid mother. It'll tell you everything you need to know. Don't you dare talk about my mother like that. I'll have a go at anyone that calls me a liar.
Then again, maybe he just looks better next to Devon Murray. Oh, I need to stop being so mean to him. I do like that they kept Ron standing up for Harry here.
Do you believe the rubbish he's come out with about you-know-who?
Yeah, I do. Has anyone else got a problem with Harry?
But one thing I do wish they had kept was Neville saying he and his grandmother both believe Harry. It's not often we see Neville speak up like this. There is a deleted scene showing a bit of this, though.
My gran says it's the Daily Prophet that's rubbish. She's cancelled our subscription.
The movie added a scene here where Harry snaps at Ron to leave him alone, and then we see him having a dream about the door in the Department of Mysteries. The movie also shows us a glimpse of the prophecy, which we don't see in the book until Harry actually finds it. I think this scene works well enough to get across a bit of the information the book goes into more detail on. I don't really have any strong feelings on it either way. Now, I've mentioned before about how classes and general school stuff often gets cut from these movies, and this movie is where we see the most of that. Again, though, I totally get why. Those things are ultimately unimportant in the grand scheme of things, so they only focus on the important classes. Another thing that was completely cut from this movie was Quidditch. Again, I think this was the right choice, because while it is fun, it ultimately doesn't contribute much to the plot after the third book. So while the movie cuts straight to Umbridge's first defense against the dark arts class, in the book we see the trio go down to breakfast where Harry and Ron tell Hermione about Seamus not believing him, and according to Hermione, Lavender doesn't believe him either. She brings up a really good point about how this kind of division, like Dumbledore said in his speech at the end of last year, is exactly what Voldemort wants.
In light of recent events, the bonds of friendship we made this year will be more important than ever.
Unfortunately, Harry and Ron aren't too keen on making friends with the Slytherins or the people who are calling Harry a liar. Another couple things happen during this breakfast, like they're approached by Angelina Johnson, who tells Harry that she's been made Quidditch captain now that Wood's gone, and that they're going to need a new keeper to replace him. Fred and George also show up and warn them about how hard the 5th year always is, mostly thanks to the Owls, or Ordinary Wizarding levels, which are huge exams 5th year students take on everything they've learned up until now. Owls have been mentioned a couple times throughout the books, but the movies don't mention them until this one, when Umbridge brings them up in her class. The Owls are another major plot point in this book, since it's now our characters' turn to take them at the end of the year, and they provide yet another source of stress in an already stressful year. The movie, again, rightly, doesn't focus on them as much, but I feel like there was no need to really mention them at all in that case. The twins also discuss their future, opening a joke shop, and talk about how they consider not even returning for their final year. They almost let slip that Harry gave them the money to start up, but Harry quickly silences them. So after looking at their schedules, the trio find they have the worst Monday imaginable. History of magic, potions, divination, and defense against the dark arts. Binns, Snape, Trelawney, and Umbridge, all in one day. And this being the Owl year, every teacher gives the students copious amounts of homework right off the bat. The movie wisely skips those first 3 classes and goes right to defense against the dark arts. The book, at least briefly, touches on all of the classes, with each teacher warning the students about the Owl exams coming at the end of the year, Snape, as usual, being a total dick to Harry, and Trelawney starting to teach them how to interpret dreams. Quite a coincidence, seeing as Harry's dreams are a huge plot point in this story. There are also a couple of things that happen between the classes, like Ron questioning Snape's loyalty to Dumbledore and the Order, leading to another argument between Ron and Hermione. Harry lashes out at them for fighting all the time, which actually seems to offend them. It's implied that Harry is really just venting his anger at people like Snape and Seamus onto them. Perhaps Ron and Hermione's bickering feels more good-natured to them than Harry, and we by proxy, see it. The trio also meet Cho after History of Magic. I haven't really talked about her all that much. I know a lot of people dislike her character, but I think that's kind of unfair. Yeah, she cries a lot and gets super emotional, but given what she's going through, I think it's pretty warranted. Her boyfriend was just murdered. That's not something she's going to get over just like that. But Hermione goes into more detail about this later, so I won't here. I'll just add that she could have easily blamed Harry for Cedric's death like so many other people do, not knowing the truth of what happened. So the fact that she believes Harry is honestly really nice of her. Plus, I really like her determination to fight back against Voldemort after Cedric's death. Hell, she even shows up to fight in the final battle in Deathly Hallows when she totally didn't have to. Bottom line, I think people are way too mean to this character. So in this scene, Cho is clearly wanting to talk to Harry and holding in her emotions over Cedric, but unfortunately, Ron, being the insensitive prick he is, starts attacking her over her favorite Quidditch team, accusing her of just jumping on the bandwagon, which causes her to leave. God damn it, Ron. So, now we come to Umbridge's Defense Against the Dark Arts class. She teaches the students strictly theory with no practical use of defensive magic at all. Obviously, Fudge, in his paranoia about Dumbledore, placed her there to ensure the students would learn nothing they could use against the Ministry. She's even more patronizing in the book than in the movie, telling the students how to greet her and just generally treating them like they're 5 years old. Well, good afternoon. A few people mumbled good afternoon in reply.
Tut tut, that won't do now, will it? I should like you please to reply, good afternoon, Professor Umbridge. One more time, please. Good afternoon, class.
Good afternoon, Professor Umbridge, they chanted back at her.
There now. That wasn't too difficult, was it?
Harry, of course, argues back against her refusal to teach them practical defense, which gets him in trouble, especially when he claims that Voldemort is back.
You have been told that a certain dark wizard is at large once again. This is a lie.
It's not a lie. I saw him. I fought him.
Detention, Mr. Potter.
So according to you, Cedric Diggory dropped dead of his own accord.
Cedric Diggory's death was a tragic accident.
Kind of like your birth, Dolores. By the way, why are Parvati and Padma looking at Umbridge's ass here? It's kind of weird. In the movie, Umbridge simply assigns Harry detention and we cut away, but in the book, she has him take a letter to Professor McGonagall, which he does, having a run-in with Peeves the Poltergeist along the way. McGonagall, after reading the letter, informs Harry that Umbridge has given him detention every night of the week, much to Harry's horror. She also warns him to keep his temper in check around Umbridge from now on, reminding him that she works for the Ministry of Magic, so angering her could get him much worse than detentions. There is a somewhat funny moment at the end of this scene. Didn't you listen to Dolores Umbridge's speech at the start of term feast, Potter? Yeah, she said progress will be prohibited or... Well, it meant that the Ministry of Magic is trying to interfere at Hogwarts. Professor McGonagall eyed him for a moment, then sniffed, walked around her desk, and held open the door for him. Well, I'm glad you listened to Hermione Granger, at any rate.